My name is Myra Bennett. I was 25 years old when my parents refused to attend my engagement party. Not because my fiancé was cruel, not because he treated me badly. They refused because he repaired air conditioners for a living. 6 months later, I watched my father applaud the mystery investor who had just saved his factory. Then the investor walked onto the stage, and my father's hands froze in midair. But that happened later. The story started 2 years earlier. I grew up in Ashford, Indiana. My father, Richard Bennett, owned the largest manufacturing company in town. My mother cared deeply about reputation, and my older sister Lauren followed her example. Then there was me. After college, I became an accountant and moved into a small apartment. My parents never understood why I wanted my own life. Then one summer afternoon, the air conditioning failed at my office. An HVAC technician arrived to fix it. His name was Ethan Carter. That was how we met. Ethan wasn't flashy. He didn't brag. He didn't try to impress anyone. He simply worked hard, kept his word, and treated people with respect. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized how rare those qualities were. 2 years later, he proposed. We were sitting on my apartment balcony when he handed me a ring and asked me to marry him. I said yes immediately. The next day, I told my family. The reaction was worse than I expected. My father stared at the ring before asking, "You're serious about this?" "Of course." He leaned back in his chair. "Myra, you can do better." The room went silent. My mother tried to soften it. "Your father is worried about your future." "No," I said, "he's worried about Ethan's job." Nobody disagreed. Lauren finally said what everyone was thinking. "He fixes air conditioners." The way she said it made it sound like a flaw. I looked around the room. Not one person asked whether Ethan made me happy. Not one person cared what kind of man he was. They only cared about what he did for a living. My father folded his arms. "He may be a decent guy, but he's not who I imagined for my daughter." "You don't even know him," I replied. "I know enough." That was the moment I realized something. My parents had already judged Ethan without ever giving him a chance. A few weeks later, I invited him to dinner, hoping things would improve. Instead, my father questioned his career, and Lauren questioned his future. On the drive home, Ethan looked out the window and quietly asked, "Your family doesn't really want to know me, do they?" I didn't answer, because I knew he was right. A month later, we planned our engagement party. I sent invitations to everyone, including my parents. Even after everything, I believed they would come. I was wrong. 3 days before the party, my mother called. "Your father doesn't think attending is a good idea." My heart sank. "And you?" The silence told me everything. Neither of them were coming. Not my father, not my mother, not even my sister. The night of the engagement party, 4 chairs near the front remained empty, reserved for my family. They stayed empty all night. As I looked at them, I realized something painful. The people who should have supported me had chosen not to. What I didn't know was that only a few weeks later, my father's factory would face the biggest crisis in its history, and the man they dismissed as just an AC repairman would become the only person capable of saving it. A few weeks after the engagement announcement, things got worse. My parents weren't just disappointed, they were embarrassed. At least, that's how they acted. Whenever Ethan's name came up, the conversation became uncomfortable. My father refused to learn anything about him. My mother kept suggesting I slow down. Lauren acted like I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Meanwhile, Ethan remained calm. He never insulted them, never argued, never asked me to choose sides. That only made me love him more. Then the night of our engagement party arrived. The restaurant was filled with friends, coworkers, and neighbors. Nearly 50 people showed up, everyone except my family. 4 empty chairs sat near the front of the room, my parents, my sisters, and her husbands. I kept glancing at them all night. Part of me still hoped they'd walk through the door. They never did. My best friend Rachel noticed. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "The people who matter are already here." She was right. The room was full of people who wanted to celebrate with us, people who cared about us, people who showed up. By the end of the night, I stopped looking at the empty chairs. I focused on the people who were actually present. Outside the restaurant, Ethan wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" I nodded. Not because I wasn't hurt, because I finally understood something. My family's approval wasn't coming, at least not anytime soon, and I couldn't keep waiting for it. Life moved on. Then 6 weeks later, everything changed. One morning, a headline appeared across town. Bennett Components loses major contract. My father's factory was in trouble. A huge client had walked away. Without that contract, hundreds of jobs were suddenly at risk. The entire town felt it. Employees worried about layoffs. Local businesses worried about losing customers. For the first time, people started asking whether Bennett Components would survive. I called my father. I offered to help. He refused immediately. "I can handle my own problems." Then he hung up. But the problems kept growing. A few weeks later, another headline appeared. Mystery investor interested in saving Bennett Components. Suddenly, the entire town had hope again. Nobody knew who the investor was. Rumors spread everywhere. Some people thought it was a large corporation. Others believed it was a wealthy businessman from Indianapolis. Nobody knew the truth, not even my father. The funny part? While everyone else was panicking, Ethan seemed completely calm. One evening I finally asked him why. He smiled. "You'll understand soon." That was all he said. At the time, I didn't know what he meant, but I was about to find out. Because the mystery investor wasn't a stranger, and when the truth finally came out, my parents' world would never be the same again. The weeks that followed were strange. Everywhere I went, people talked about the mystery investor. At the grocery store, at church, at the diner downtown. Nobody knew who had stepped in to save Bennett Components, but everyone was grateful. The layoffs had stopped. The factory was still running, and for the first time in months, my father looked relieved. One evening, I stopped by my parents' house. My father was sitting at the kitchen table, talking about the investor. "Whoever this person is, they understand business." My mother nodded. "They saved this town." Lauren smiled. "They must be incredibly successful." I stood quietly listening. The same people who refused to attend my engagement were now praising the man they had spent months looking down on. They just didn't know it yet. A few days later, the town announced an appreciation dinner. The mystery investor would finally be revealed. The entire town was invited. My father couldn't stop talking about it. "It'll be nice meeting the person who saved the factory." I almost laughed. If only he knew. That night, I asked Ethan if he was nervous. He shook his head. "No." "Not even a little?" He smiled. "The truth is the truth. It'll be fine." His calmness amazed me. Anyone else would have enjoyed what was coming. Anyone else would have wanted revenge. But Ethan wasn't like that. Saving the factory had never been about proving my father wrong. It was about protecting jobs, helping families, doing the right thing. The night before the event, my family had dinner together. Once again, my father praised the investor. "This is exactly the type of businessman I respect." I looked down at my plate. The irony was unbelievable. For months, my father had judged Ethan because of his job. Tomorrow he would discover that the man he admired most was the same man he had refused to accept. When dinner ended, my father smiled. "Tomorrow should be interesting." I nodded. "It definitely will." The next evening, I stood in front of my mirror getting ready. Across the room, Ethan adjusted his tie. For the first time since I'd met him, He wasn't wearing a work uniform, just a navy suit and a calm smile. I looked at him and realized something. He hadn't changed at all. The only thing about to change was my family's opinion, and in less than an hour, the entire town would witness it. Ashford Town Hall was packed. Factory workers, business owners, teachers, families, nearly the entire town had gathered to thank the mystery investor who had saved Bennett Components. My father sat at the front beside my mother and sister. For the first time in months, he looked relaxed. The mayor stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone. After a short speech, he smiled toward the side entrance. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new owner of Bennett Components." The door opened, and Ethan walked in. For a second, nobody reacted. Then whispers spread across the room. People recognized him. The local HVAC guy, the man who fixed their air conditioners, the man everyone knew. I looked at my father. He had already started clapping. Once, twice, then his hands stopped, frozen in midair. The color drained from his face. My mother grabbed the edge of the table. Lauren slowly lowered her phone. Meanwhile, the crowd erupted. People stood, cheered, applauded. Ethan calmly walked onto the stage and adjusted the microphone. "Thank you." The room quieted. "I didn't buy this factory for recognition." He looked toward the workers. "I bought it because families depend on these jobs." Heads nodded throughout the crowd. "We're keeping the factory open, we're upgrading equipment, and we're investing in its future." The hall exploded with applause. For the first time in months, people had hope. Real hope. Not promises, not rumors. A future. When Ethan finished speaking, the mayor invited my father to say a few words. The room turned toward him. Slowly, he walked to the stage. He stood at the microphone, tried to speak, and couldn't. For several seconds, the room was silent. Then my father looked directly at Ethan. His voice finally came out. "I judged a man I didn't understand." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I was wrong. That was it. No excuses, no explanations, just the truth. The crowd applauded softly. Not for the factory, not for the deal, for humility. After the ceremony ended, people lined up to thank Ethan. I watched from across the room. The same man my parents had rejected was now being celebrated by the entire town, and for the first time, my father truly saw him. A few minutes later, he walked over to us. He looked at Ethan, then at me. "I should have been at your engagement." I nodded. "Yes, you should have." My father lowered his eyes. Then he turned toward Ethan. "I'm sorry." Ethan extended his hand. My father took it. And in that moment, 6 months of pride finally came to an end. The man they called just an AC repairman hadn't only saved a factory, he had saved the town. And maybe, just maybe, he had saved our family too. 3 weeks after the town hall event, the first new equipment arrived at the factory. For the first time in months, people weren't talking about layoffs, they were talking about growth. Employees who had feared losing their jobs were planning for the future again. Local businesses felt the difference immediately. The entire town seemed lighter. Meanwhile, things at home slowly began to change. One evening, my father called, not my mother, not a message through someone else, him. "Would you and Ethan come to dinner Saturday?" For a moment, I didn't know what to say. It was the first invitation he'd ever given Ethan. "I'll ask him." "We'd like that," my father replied quietly. Saturday evening, Ethan and I arrived at my parents' house. The atmosphere felt different. No tension, no judgment. Just 4 people trying to start over. For most of dinner, my father asked Ethan questions, real questions. How he built his company, how he grew the business, how he managed employees. For the first time, he wasn't judging. He was listening. After dessert, my father asked Ethan to step onto the porch with him. I stayed inside with my mother. 10 minutes later, they returned. Neither man said much, but something had changed. On the drive home, I asked Ethan what they talked about. He smiled. "Your dad said he was proud of the man you chose." I looked out the window and laughed softly. 6 months earlier, that same man wouldn't even attend our engagement. Life is strange sometimes. A few months later, my parents attended our wedding. This time, there were no empty chairs. My father walked me down the aisle himself. Before handing my hand to Ethan, he stopped for a second. Then he quietly said, "Take care of her." Ethan smiled. "Always." Years later, people in Ashford still talk about the mystery investor story. Most of them remember the business deal. Some remember the standing ovation. But whenever I think about that night, I remember something else. I remember my father's hands freezing in midair, because that was the exact moment his assumptions fell apart. The exact moment he realized character matters more than titles. Success matters more than appearances, and a person's value can never be measured by a uniform. The man my parents called just an AC repairman saved their factory, protected hundreds of jobs, and earned the respect they once refused to give him. In the end, Ethan didn't win because he became wealthy. He won because he never changed. He remained the same hardworking, honest man he had always been. And that's why I married him. Because some people build reputations. Others build things that last. Ethan built both. And that's a lesson my family will never forget.